Hi guys, welcome to the 8th episode of Futurism Forever. Tonight we're doing something a little different. We'll be covering Ernst Niekisch and German National Bolshevism. Reading his essay, Technology, the Devourer of Men by Ernst Niekisch. So I'm sure a lot of our audience is unfamiliar with Ernst Niekisch. Here with the other Karl, CSD, and Zoltanis. Can you guys do a brief introduction of Niekisch, who he was, what he advocated for, that sort of thing?
Yes. Ernst Niekisch was, of course, a member of the National Bolshevik Party in Germany. And, he wrote books like Hitler, A German Fate, complaining that Hitler wasn't a true nationalist in the German sense. And, of course, later on, he got locked up in a concentration camp, and then eventually he got released out and lived in the GDR for a while, doing public speeches and working at universities, only to leave and then die later on. And I've heard, after locked up in the camps, that he lost his eyesight and stuff like that. But yeah, so that's about the.
He also renounced National Bolshevism.
Yeah, he did.
Also, something else that should be pointed out is that he was also part of the Conservative Revolution and was friends with Ernst Junger.
Yeah, I've heard him. Ernst Junger mentioned that in the 102 Years in Europe documentary. He was pretty tight with Patel, too, from my understanding.
He's friends with both of them, including the Strasser brothers.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a pretty good
reason why he didn't die in a concentration camp.
Yeah, Ernst Junger was respected by the National Socialists, but it wasn't really mutual, from my understanding. He gives just shout out to Himmler, though. He thought Himmler was a smart
it's the same
guy,
thing with Oswald Spengler. He was held as an esteemed view, but he was very critical. As far as I'm aware, when it comes to academics, they had esteemed views of. They only actively targeted them if they were hypercritical of the Nazi party. So that's part of the reason why Patel and Niekisch were targeted a lot, and Oswald Spengler had a couple of his books banned.
Yeah.
One of the criticisms was that the National Socialists weren't real socialists, by the way.
They also, this part of it was also anti-fascism. Then you also had stuff like Spengler, who was saying that they were too proletarian, stuff like that, which is just autistic. But how can somebody be too proletarian? It's like
I don't know. I think that's a pretty good intro to Niekisch and the environment surrounding this essay that was written in 1931. It's a little divergent from futurism. He takes a very critical stance of technology and its role on humanity. So I'll probably be approaching it from a critical standpoint. But yeah, it should be interesting what people think of it. So I'll start reading part one. So Technology, the Devourer of Men, written in 1931 by Ernst Niekisch. The unleashing of individualism and the perfecting of technology are two parallel phenomena. First, sweetly, timidly, man raised with this quieted conscience the veil that covered secrets, and did not fall down dead. He discovered unexpected things. That which was mysterious became natural and explicable. He didn't have respect for the unknown, and he who lacked this respect bore its fruits. The success he won encouraged him to recommence. His scrutinizing view went to the depths of things. He did experimentation and research, but each new piece of knowledge acquired is a means to impose on nature a new servitude. The perfecting of technology increased the general yield. The augmentation of consumption, the lure of unlimited possibilities, required a change in economic organization. At a certain stage of development, technology always corresponds to a particular form of economic structure. The individual crosses successive steps. The sentiment of his superiority and the consciousness of his force increase. He puts traditional social relations in question and concludes that by reason of his advanced knowledge, they can no longer be justified. He revolts, having finally won the cause and transforming in this fashion the social conditions. The tendency to push limits marks the whole of this evolution. Technology finally believes itself at the height of all tasks. Industrial production pushes into unfathomable growth. The individual feels liberated. In principle, he no longer recognizes any limit. Rules, order, and harmony of the whole do not result from things. Still yet, in the measure where we respect borders, we do it uniquely from an external point of view. That is to say, from the point of view of profitability. Technology turns toward new tasks when investment is worth the pain. It needs a capital to put at its disposal in the hope of fetching one-day interest. The production of goods is regulated by the perspectives of profit. When there is a chance of profit, capital flows. The more capital works, the more the rule of man over these things widens. In general, the individual uses his liberty in the measure where it profits him. He is all the more free as he represents capital, as he is rich. Ultimately, the intensity of the processes of economic and technical development seem like a simple function of the profitability of capital available to an investment. Even the social importance of an individual is only an indicator of the profit he earns, of his revenues. From there, money becomes the measure of everything. The modern reign of money is the constitutional form of the politics of force that correspond to the technical era. Its system of provisioning consumer goods to societies is based on the capitalist economy. Unleashed individualism is the expression of its moral and mental attitude. Technology, by removing everywhere the barriers imposed on human expertise and by submitting all sources of natural energy to man, opens the way to transformations of a great span. It shortens the distances, bringing closer that which is far, and rendering the entire world understandable and accessible. In this atmosphere, metropolises, empires, production on a grand scale, economic monopolies, and multinational trusts flourish. The individual who feels at home between his formations and constructions, between his machines, his instruments, and invisible microwaves, begins to think in terms of continents and finally in terms of the universe. So this essay is in like 5 parts. I'll put the link in the description, but we're gonna break after each part and discuss what was read up to that point. So what did you guys think of that intro?
I mean, nothing he said is wrong. Like, it is correct, and it has been pointed out by many people that capitalism just erodes the older forms of like culture and organization and how we organize society. Many people have pointed this out, from like people like Marx to all the way to traditionalists like Richard Weaver and Julius Evola.
I actually think what he's writing right here, like, you're right, there is other criticisms of how this happened under capitalism, but like the focus on capital specifically and how it functions at the economy doing that, it seems to be very Marxian in his analysis on it.
Yeah, I would say so. Does like technological development have to coincide with capitalism? Like, could another system take the reins?
At the end, it's not as anti-technology as you think. the article.
Okay, yeah. Like I come from more of a futurist background, so like I like technology and development, but I'm also like anti-capitalist. So I don't think the two go hand in hand. Like, you know,
Well,
that's
I
just
do know, like with like Niekisch, because of the association with like conservative revolution, that actually has an influence like on modern, like European new right people like Gilliam Fay. So like Niekisch had an influence on him, which is where like archaeofuturism's view on it, and I believe I haven't read this article, but I believe that Niekisch is probably going to take it in the direction because of his influence on Fay that technology is bad when it's not controlled, but when it's controlled within the framework of traditional culture, it can be beneficial. Is probably what he's going to argue, I'm assuming.
Yeah, he actually criticizes Marxism for acting like the eroding of culture is a good thing in this article. But I won't spoil too much.
Yeah, it sounds like it's something futurism would probably disagree with, though.
Yeah. Personally, I think progress is good. You know, cultures and people aren't static, and you know they should evolve and adapt to change. I think strong cultures are able to adapt to social changes brought on by technology, and weaker cultures that want to cling to tradition get thrown into the dustbin of history, as Marinetti would put it. That's like my point of view, but
I don't think Niekisch would entirely disagree with you on that. I think he's more just concerned on how like liberal capitalism could just completely destroys culture and turns it into like turns society into just a big shopping mall, basically.
Yeah, I think the way he would actually look at it is probably culture and stuff like that in the prospect of utility. So like if obviously if the culture is beneficial, he's okay with it. It's just that he probably thinks that there needs to be an idea of this like traditional social order, or society is just going to be a shopping mall.
Yeah.
that seems fair. Do you have anything to add, Carl?
Well, like I said, I was just kind of skimming through it yesterday, and it sounded like he was very critical of technology, but then when I got to the first part, yeah, he does bring up the issues within liberal capitalism, and that becomes very clear that, like, you know, when technology is used within liberal capitalism, you think of things like when I was a kid, you'd think that there would be flying cars and all this stuff, and instead, all it is that screens. All we got is these screens that people are just hooked on constantly.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like under liberal capitalism, progress is actually kind of stalled now, and like we don't have that much new technology. Space exploration and stuff like that has kind of fallen to the wayside now that they don't have a Soviet Union to compete against.
They're more interested about getting people to consume product, not necessarily automating or advancing things for social ends, but more for like market and like commodity production and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's fair. Should we proceed with part 2?
Yes, please.
Carl, do you want to read the second part?
Yeah, I gotta get to it really quick.
Okay, no problem.
Is it in the Telegram chat?
Yeah, I posted the link in the chat.
Okay.
Niekisch translation project.
Yeah, sorry if it's taken me a little bit.
No problem. Yeah.
All right, yeah, I'll read the second part.
Okay.
Just it's gonna take a while for this sucker to load. So here we go. Part 2 of 5. So when there are no more enigmas to resolve, to explain, respect also disappears. The veneration of saints freezes, becoming a simple convention. Although by habit we still do the sign of the cross. We know that to believe in the sacred is to lie to oneself. The sentiment of rank and of distance dies out. We become a democrat who is put on equal footing with everyone else. We familiarize ourselves with the forces that can blow away the universe. We touch them daily. Children play with the stars. We are familiar with everything, and we know everything. Nothing can astonish or inspire respect anymore. All is exposed to the floodlight of the perfect projectors. No longer feeling respect. To be without discomfort signifies that we are no longer no limits. But those who do not know limits ignores responsibility. He runs the world and abandons his destiny, the sphere of his origins, the places of his childhood. Whatever may come, he leaves behind him. He goes as far as permitted, and with each step, he profanes and destroys. By moving the frontiers, he hurts what organically develops, because all that is organic is limited. Limits are respected of life. By demolishing them, we are living substance. Technology violates nature. It does not account for it. Technical progress snatches nature, which follows its own laws, one piece of land after another. What for technology is a triumph, for the nature ravage and violation. Technology, by raising bit by bit the limits fixed by nature, destroys life. The machine, which is only a function, supplants the organism, which is an inherent sense. The function of a machine consists of providing a calculable return. The sense of an organism is to exist, and to realize this existence, technology always abuses the respect for life. It devours men and all that is human. We feel it with bodies, blood, and cooling liquid. Consequently, in the technical era, war takes the forms of a murderous butchery. The individual, conquered by the spirit of technology, unleashes and hungry for records, sees in the possession of weapons of annihilation the most perfect of things, of women and children in the hinterland. The conception of a modern war reveals in the most formidable and terrifying fashion in the mortifying genius of technology. At its apogee, its productive capacity is such that it can, at a given moment, rapidly and radically exterminate all living beings wherever it finds them.
Yeah, that's part two. He comes out hard against technology in this one, saying it threatens traditional values and like religious sentiments and beliefs.
Like
He starts out with
it's
that.
saying that it takes away our own humanity as well, which I've seen similar arguments that Dugan has made about this as well.
Can you elaborate on that?
Basically, what Dugan believes is that like liberal capitalism and its use of technology has just basically eroded away every single like identity. First, it eroded like our ethnic and cultural groups' identities, and it erodes our religious identities, then racial identities.
Well, it's partly
was-
why he argues it's that like technology, like within like liberal capitalism, is the highest form of racism, is because it wants to destroy everything and basically make the entire planet a common market, a common consumer identity, basically.
Yeah, basically destroys all races and peoples. He also talks about how it's now starting to like erase our like own our own gender roles and stuff as that, and eventually it will take away our own humanity.
Yeah, Diego Fissaro, like the Italian like Marxist and like Gentilian like idealist in Italy, he has a lot of good lectures on like Gramscian like critical theory and how hegemony relates to the deconstruction of gender to create like a concept of man without like a sexual identity, so they become interchangeable with the marketplace. It's why he actually argues that trannies, for example, are the highest manifestation of capitalism because they have to consume product to become the gender that they want to be.
He's not wrong, though.
Yeah, it's like a consumer identity. Like anyone can pick and choose what they want to be now. Nature doesn't really play much of a role. It's all like ego. I don't know.
I'd say probably most people would I'd say probably most people in our own sphere would agree with the sentiments that Niekisch is talking about for the most part.
Yeah, for the most part. I would kind of agree with that part. When he gets into war, that's the part that I find really interesting. Like Marinetti describes war as the highest form of modern art. So like he likes that the new possibilities brought on by technology as it pertains to war. Ernst Junger talks about that in On Pain too, about how technology is transforming the battlefield. He did think like it was removing the heroism from war. Any thoughts on Niekisch's views on technology and war?
His views on war and technology is pretty similar to how Evola. If you read Metaphysics of War,
yeah, I've read it.
Yeah, it's basically what he argues in Metaphysics of War. It's very similar.
Also, something to add on to his bio is that he was part of the more action-orientated section of the conservative revolution called the National Revolutionaries.
I do know that Niekisch rejected traditional art, though. He was a pretty big fan of expressionism. But...
What was his thoughts on socialist realism?
I don't know what he thought about socialist realism. I just know that he liked expressionism and did not like traditional art.
Yeah. Did he like Otto Dix? He was also fell into trouble with the Nazis, but
I think so.
He did a lot of really good sketches of World War One, and after the post-war years in the Weimar Republic, he did a lot of work. Unlike all the social depravity that was going on, war veterans returning home, like people with no legs living on the street, prostitutes, alcoholism.
I do know a lot of the modern artists in Germany. Like, part of the reason why they were targeted is because of the art school stuff with Hitler when he was younger, and like the other reasons, because a lot of them weren't German nationalists, whereas like in Italy, a lot of the futurists were nationalists.
I think in Otto Dix's case, like he was portraying a broken society. Like I would describe his work as anti-war. It wasn't.
Well, I believe the reason why he was specifically targeted, besides describing a broken society, is because like some of the first like anti-Nazi propaganda paintings or like posters to be made are actually made by him. Some of the first ones.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. It's talked about in the Berlin Sin Cities documentary, I believe.
Okay, I'll have to check that one out. But yeah, should we proceed to part 3? Karl, do you have anything to add about this passage?
Not too much. I mean, it seems like a lot of you guys know way more about these other authors than I do, since I haven't read most of their works yet.
Okay, that's fair. We'll move on to part 3. Just give me a second here. All right. Excuse me. Of course, this terrible self-revelation occurs only at the end. The spirit of technology unveils its own nature with such violence, only when it has already penetrated and subjugated all of existence. Before the power to extend the toxic coverings of its murderous fury over that which is living, it must have already crossed many steps of its progress and its propagation. In the most intimate sphere, in the smallest cell, in each individual, the spirit of technology begins its work, secret and underground, of the destruction of living substance. The loss of this substance leads to proletarianization, whose final product is the specialized worker. In a few hours, he learns the rudimentary maintenance of machines and can consequently be employed and take his reports, without any preparation in all branches of production. The proletarian does not have a well-defined sphere of work, no particular expertise that distinguishes him and gives him a sense of life. He is nothing in himself and by himself. He is anything, mobile or interchangeable. He is a function of the machine, a little quantity of energy besides the vast processes of production. Between him and the produced goods, there is only a bond between cause and effect. Psychological relations, whose depth and abundance makes the wealth of the human soul, are not created between him and things. He sells his potential to work. This lack of psychological bonds equates to a lack of responsibility. He also feels so little sense of responsibility for his work that the boss feels responsible for the fate of his workers. Artisanal production was the first to fall under the empire of technology. The decline of the artisan was its inevitable consequence. The artisan became the worker. The artisanal craft struggled desperately, but in vain, against this decline. Today, we take the gear of the processes of the mechanization of agriculture. The drama lived by the artisan is repeated on the peasant. It is true that the invention of the combine harvester, which prepared to equally mow down the independence of the European peasant, already happened in 1833. But until the present, it has not been employed against the cultivator. The draft animals no longer have a place. In the meantime, tractor unit was necessary. The tractor was constructed. Ever since the total transformation of agriculture commenced. In North America, in South America, in Australia, we already utilize the combine harvester. The cost of production of wheat has fallen by more than half. The farmer supplanted the peasant as the worker did the artisan. The farmer is a proletarian peasant. The structure of agriculture changed. The peasant loses footing. The basis of his free existence are shaken. The soil is stolen from under him. Technology chases him from the earth. The natural land becomes a romantic dream as the little workshop of the artisan once did. The international property credit found on March 3rd in Basel will sooner or later make its ravages, like an avenging angel among the peasants. It will only be the leader of the spirit of technology in the domain of German agriculture. The independent peasant is going to disappear. With the disaggregation of labors, all the traditional forms of life change, in the measure where man ceases to be something for himself. He becomes a public being. He will be at home everywhere and nowhere. At the end, these transformations will equally touch the foundations of the state. It loses its organic character that follows its proper laws. It becomes an integral part of a greater economic space, whose branches of production are rationalized according to the norms of the last conquests of technology. Man is part of the conquest of nature. He does not make an account where he tramples on the feet of nature itself, and thus he destroys that part of nature. In the cold climate of technology, the last biological reserves freeze. The natural energies of reproduction and growth become exhausted. Thus it is nature that avenges itself. It punishes this violation. That technology committed against it by suicide. Technology celebrates its victories among heaps of corpses, until one day with it will choke under their weight. That's part 3. He talks about how technology is like transforming the labor force, how it like rendered the artisan obsolete and replaced him with a non-specialized worker.
Yeah, he's talking about what kind of like what Marx talks about on the proletarianization process, bringing them into the cities, bringing them into the factories, uprooting them from the soil, basically. And then he starts talking about how technology is basically consuming life and consuming the planet. You can kind of see that in the modern context, especially with technology or like environmental destruction, even like in the Soviet Union, like what they did to whales, for example. Just a lot of stuff you can talk about related to that.
Yeah, it also seems like he's talking about how it just turns people into worker drones as well. And it also kind of talks about how like people are basically start to lose their property and all of that as well, and just kind of have to suck up to some big business as well. That's what I kind of got out of it as well. Does anyone have any disagreements with that?
I think it's like just objectively true. We definitely see how technology transforms the labor force. I think people have to adapt to changes, though. That's like my personal perspective. Like, yeah, certain jobs become obsolete, but you can learn new skills and adapt to change.
Yeah, because I've seen it in like North Korea where they have certain jobs that people over here don't do, where they're like manually cutting grass and doing all kinds of shit that most workers don't have to do because of things like technology.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be fine with the shorter work week if technology can alleviate some of the mundane tasks that we used to have to do. I don't necessarily see it as a bad thing. It all depends on who's in control of the factories and like what the economic structure is. Like, I don't think it's necessarily technological progress is necessarily incompatible with like economic justice. It's just right now we have capitalists in power.
I think you can also look at the context of what technological process is happening, because I know like in America, for example, like the truckers, for example, it's a pretty big side of the population does like the trucking job. Well, they're wanting to phase in like self-driving vehicles eventually. Well, that's just going to completely just decimate like half the country's population, especially for like a source of income and employment. And a lot of these people are like people who like are high school dropouts or like barely graduated high school, never really went for like a higher form of education. So I don't really know how you're gonna get them to get a higher job training unless the state effectively subsidizes it. But I don't see that happening in the United States because it's just gonna look at it like it's a waste of money. I'm just gonna spend that on bailing out the corporations.
Well, I remembered that when Biden was running, he did the literal learn to code meme in an interview.
Yeah, it's just some boomer.
Yeah, like it would have to be phased in slowly, and I don't know. I think the companies that employ these people, if they want to implement self-driving trucking, like they should have some responsibility to their workers, and like I don't know, help them out with training them on new skills so they don't end up homeless. And like that would create all kinds of social problems, obviously.
I think another problem that Niekisch has with like liberalism is that it just doesn't care about the people at all. And Zoltanus did bring this up last time he spoke.
Yeah,
Like it puts in the individual and profit before the collective, and Niekisch talks about this at the end of the article.
yeah. A healthy state would balance technological progress and like new technologies that can make our life easier with like respect for communities and people.
Yeah, Niekisch says that at the end.
Does he? Oh, okay.
Yeah, he does. He does. Trust me. Like I said, he's not as anti-technological as you think he is.
Okay.
Just in terms of capitalism using technology.
Okay, the second and third parts are pretty scathing, but I didn't make it to the end in all honesty, so we're working our way towards that. Yeah, anyone have anything to add on like technology and labor?
Well, I do have to question, like, what are your guys' thoughts on how China is handling it these days?
I'm underread on the subject.
I am. What little I've heard.
I believe China like actually pays for people to go to school, or they make it more affordable for people to go to school to get a certain education, or the government usually assigns them to like a new job if it gets phased out.
Yeah, that's the way it should be.
Yeah, from what little I've heard, it seems I have a more positive opinion on what they're doing than what we're doing in America.
Mm-hmm. Like I know in America, when General Motors left like the Rust Belt, which is where I live, they had this thing called the buyout people could take, where they take out like a couple $1,000s, or they got the option for the company to pay for them to go to school for like anything somebody would pick, which is pretty cool, but at the same time it's kind of bad because they made so many people unemployed, and a lot of people, even with them making the education more affordable, really couldn't pay for it because it was like it wasn't much. It was they were only paying like 10% of the schooling.
Yeah, I think we all agree that like the state shouldn't like stop technological progress, but should create like a cushion for workers who are affected by technological change to learn new skills so that they're able to continue to be contributing members to the workforce and to society. Obviously, we don't want to end up with like a massive homeless population that creates all kinds of other social problems like addiction and crime and the stuff that's going to inevitably happen as a result of vast swaths of the population being rendered obsolete by technological progress. Yeah, you have to balance the two. I think any state that actually cares about its people will just do that. It's pretty common sense and self-explanatory, but we live under a system that only cares about money and profits and capital. That doesn't care about
you
people.
had that problem too under like the Soviet Union or a lot of the red countries early on, because they were just rapidly trying to industrialize to such a point where all they cared about was industrialization, not even the population, and it led to all kinds of problems.
Yeah. Okay. Karl, do you want to read part 4?
Yeah, I'll tackle part 4. Okay, doctrines and theories, programs and dogmas, which serve innovative historical movements in order to make them known in the world, are neither important or decisive in themselves. Even if we know their content, that does not mean we comprehend the essence, the sense, and veritable historical mission of the movement. Only those who, after the letter of theories, see the hidden motive forces pushing essential transformations, feel this behind a radical change in the world. Marxism is more than this red flag, in the proper and figurative sense, which then permits it to carry masses, uneducated and undemanding, and put them in states of blind excitation. Marxism is the premonition of things that will happen. Certainly, it is not in this sense that it can show that it will be under the sober lights of its future reality. It is, in some way, the idealization of the future. Marx was a prophet, but he transformed a cruel destiny and an overwhelming necessity into a religion of salvation. Very certainly, the spirit of technology lives in it. He was a pioneer. He was its pioneer and announced the mechanization of life. He accelerated these processes by giving hope to those who would become its victims. He gave them the faith of which he would become a curse on the world. Thus, they waited with impatience for this paradise that would become their hell. However, the self-destructive folly was provoked with the aid of thought of the German philosopher Hegel. The dialectical dynamic was the magic formula of the Great Spirit. Under its supernatural light, it accomplishes the transubstantiation of the thankless way of technological progress along the road of grace towards salvation. It must push to the extreme mechanization, rationalization, monopolism, and proletarianization that the sole means of arriving at the exploration of expropriators within the capitalist society approaching its apogee. The fruit of a beautiful socialism ripens. The persuasive force of the dialectical dynamic was due to the fact that the idea seems to be more than an amusing thought game, and they must recognize its faithful image of a future reality. The walls and the gables of the slaughterhouse shine in the distance in the midst of colored with blood. Such an aurora, their silhouettes, resembles a fairy tale castle. Irresistibly, they wait for their victims, who hasten to arrive at the castle. Anti-Marxism to them is not a force that slows, that bears a solution. It only means the habitual protest of those who profit from the mechanization of the world, but who fear their privileges when someone begins to say aloud what happened. To say properly, anti-Marxism is not the fear of consequences, but the fear of what will be clear of that. But the fear that they will be clearly explained. Marxism creates illusions and provokes enthusiasm in the place of warnings. Anti-Marxism, in contrast, is hypocritical. It throws accusations and then openly profits from the situation and secretly favors it. By the force of things, humanity lets itself be carried by this current. Already the wind carries the spray of distant whirlpools. The shade of dangerous reefs draws itself on the horizon. Marxism greets them as isles of happiness, while anti-Marxism watches the anchorages to find shelter. It would like to reserve it elusively. Consequently, he does have everything for those men. Carried by the current, seeing upstream, Marxism attracts the view in the direction of the onward march, puts him in a fury. Marxist doctrine is naive. It glorifies the progress that will destroy its followers. Anti-Marxism is a tartuffery, whatever the hell that word is. It praises the good old times so that no one remarks it uses modern times exclusively for itself.
Yeah, I don't know what tartuffery means either. Anyone else know?
Google it.
I have.
Just Google the word. It's like, what does this mean?
Yeah. The listeners can Google it if they're interested. Tartuffery.
I mean, like, you could probably somebody right here could probably just search it up real quick. It wouldn't be a problem. Just copy and paste.
All right, Tartuffery, the character or behavior of a Tartuffle. Hypocrisy is chronicle of that doesn't explain anything.
Oh, just so basically a hypocritical person. Okay.
So I found like a hypocrite or a religious hypocrite or a hypocritical pretender to excellence of any kind.
Yep.
Sounds like
okay.
infrared.
The more you know.
You should call him a Tartuff in your debate with him on Tuesday.
Like, according to Ernst and Niekisch, you're a hypocrite.
A Tartuffery, you won't know what you're talking about. Throw him a curveball.
Hypocrite.
Yeah, this
Don't
passage
throw
kind of
stones in glass houses.
Niekisch was just trying to sound smart here, guys.
yeah, that's it. It kind of picks up where Zolt left off in the last part, though, talking about how the Soviet Union became so concerned about industrializing that they kind of stopped giving a shit about the people, and it did have negative effects on the population.
Yeah, they realized this like later in the Stalin's like regime, so they started focusing on consumer goods. But even by then, like the consumer side of the economy was so fucked, there was really no way to fix it or to catch up to the West. It just put too much into like military production.
Yeah, this is where they separate from the Marxists, and also in the way that they're like how Marx originally predicted that like different European identities would go away as capitalism grew, which he was correct about, and he said that for the most part was a good thing. Niekisch says no, that's a bad thing, and I think a lot of fascists would agree with him on that. But where he would disagree with fascists is that he says no, we shouldn't be anti-Marxist.
Exactly. One little note talking about industrialization is it just reminds me of how they put that one factory in Nigeria that's never hardly been used. Like they had this huge ass elaborate steel factory and they hardly ever used it for like 30 years or 40 or whatever, how long it was. And it just really shows like the inept and incompetence that can go into the kind of planning that these communist countries do.
Oh, in Nigeria, there's actually a guy there in Africa now who got training in the West. He came back, and they have all kinds of like these stones, like in this one African country, and he bought all of them up, and he just uses it to like create cobble roads all over the place because they can't afford actual pavement or like concrete, so just cobble roads with it. Kind of beside the point. Sorry, it's kind of irrelevant, but
I'm just thinking of something to respond with. Yeah,
there really wasn't much to say about it, like because like part of it was just talking about hypocrisy. Yeah, Marx has his problems, but overall, Niekisch thinks Marx is mostly right on a lot of things. I mean, that's what a lot of like. There's even fascists that would say that, like Primo de Rivera's like critique on Marxism and his selected writings. He says like the problem with Marx was his view that tradition and like culture really wasn't necessarily a good thing. You can kind of see that with Marx's advocation of like free trade and supply side economics, but pretty much like the fascist views that the economy had to be used for social ends, which I think Niekisch stands for. You could probably make the argument that Niekisch is probably misrepresenting what fascists actually think, but that's probably because he hasn't actually interacted with any real fascists.
Yeah. Jose Antonio's co-leader Ramos, isn't that his name? I remember Ramos said that like we agree with Marxists on the problem, we just disagree with the solution.
Yeah, like you can even find that like in like Goebbels' writings or like anybody from that time. I just think it's probably the whole reason why that probably exists there from Niekisch is probably from a miscommunication with actual fascists.
I think he bought into like what Stalin was saying about fascism a little too much.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think this section kind of spoke for itself. I don't really have anything to add to it. If anyone doesn't have anything else they want to say, we can proceed to part 5. Sound good?
Yeah, sounds great.
Okay, so this is the final part. The basically individualist attitude, which is at the base of the processes of technical development, is naturally expressed by the fact that direction of all the organisms, rationally structured, tangled, and fused, finds itself in the hands of a small group of people. This minority, which only knows its own interest, ignores all metaphysical response. Yeah, people with big noses.
Little tiny hats.
And tiny hats, ignores all metaphysical responsibility and only thinks in terms of profitability. The men who compose it are the technical functionaries of the economic system. Even the men of the masses are technical functions of their machines. In Des Tiers Falls by George Mueller, this genial, fantastic vision of the future by Rek Malexowin Grant is a formidable symbol of these lords of the world that technology brings into power. Submitting to the tempo and the force of the machine that he invented, obsessed with technology and rejected by life, he is a great constructor, a miserable shipwreck of a human. Hecatombs of human bodies perish, quantities of human life found themselves wasted, organic communities fall into dust. The fraternization of men is realized under the form of an immense herd of proletarians, who have at their head the chief proletarians with withered hearts. That will be the way of the American Europeans' world, of the Western world. The Western man, who is the arm of technology, to revolt against the natural order, will expiate his crime by submitting to the law of technology, excuse me, to the law of technology, which crushes all that is living in him. We cannot stop the victorious course of technology across the world. The latecomer, people are put in a position of dependency in the fashion of falling under the yoke of industrially more advanced nations. These last years, some of these people, until the present underdeveloped, suddenly realized the situation. Firstly, the Russians, but equally the Chinese and Turks, who became conscious of the danger. Given the particular character of these people, the situation changed completely, leading to unexpected forms of development. These peoples, Russia at the head, didn't simply imitate the West. They did not assimilate the mentality and the manner of being by making abstractions of themselves. In Russia, as well as in China and Turkey, relatively young nations entered into contact with technology. This gave a strange result. The Russian people could then oppose the constraint of mechanization with their own weight and a great force, flexible and organic. It did not use its living substance by sacrificing it to the perfection of the technological apparatus. They seized technology and not the inverse. The power of organic material reigned over the processes of mechanization, showing the way and the goal, spawning channels, but equally indicating the rules. The power was habituated by the instinctive wisdom of the biological substance of the Russian people. It is in the Russian state and in the authority that they exercise that this organic power shows its value, with much energy, with a firm hand, and without hesitation. They made the inevitable concessions to the spirit of technology. Since then, they abandoned courageously and imperturbably that which we have refused to in many years. The application of collectivism to agriculture was, before all, the sacrifice that they had to make, given the revolutionary effects that we have waited for since the combine harvester. This arbitrary act, freeing them of illusions, henceforth permitted them to be the masters of all the decisions to follow. By placing the living, organizing power above the mechanizing tendencies of technology, the mechanization of Russia could be realized according to the rules of collectivism. They braced for and broke the individualist pressure of the technological spirit. Here, it did not open the way to the domination of the anonymous 3 cents. Henceforth, the state was on the rise. Certainly, the individualist principle of technology is in fundamental opposition with the collectivist form of life in Russia. Even the dangerous work of engineers testifies to this opposition. Collectivism is the social form that the organic will must adopt when it wants to affirm itself against the mortifying influences of technology and limit them to a minimum. Russia converted this collectivist form of life such that it will have sufficient vital force to restrain the dangerous tendencies of technology. The hate that America and Europe demonstrates towards Russia is the protest of the techno-individualist spirit that collides with the organic barriers of self-defense and believes itself violated when it fails to achieve its work of biological destruction. The Western world, in its individualist irresponsibility, feels annoyed and provoked by the sole existence of the people that impose the severe discipline of responsibility. The demon of technology feels frustrated with its wages. It would want the whole of humanity to burn on its altar. Right now, it foams in rage because the peoples of the East have restrained it and put it at their service to become their domesticated genie. The Catholic curates, the Protestant pastors, and the apostles of Western civilization echo the horrible growls of this demon. And there concludes Technology, the Devourer of Men by Ernst Niekisch.
I got to highly disagree with Niekisch on that one. I got to extremely disagree. Because he's saying that the idea of technology itself was individualist and it was circumvented by collectivism. Well, like if we look at what Russia was actually doing with collectivism, it was all about technology, industrialization, and modernization, even to the point where they were willing to kill off large sections of the population. They weren't investing in the consumer economy, or the housing side of the economy, which is part of the reason why they were complete and total failure outside of metal and grain production. So, like, Niekisch right there is basically a complete, total fucking dumbass.
But Stalin did nothing wrong.
A lot of Stalin's.
What are y'all talking about?
A lot of Stalin's like crimes against humanity and shit didn't really become widely known until after he was out of power, from my understanding.
Well, yeah, after he's out of power, yeah, but you did have information of this that like flew around in the Third Reich during Operation Barbarossa, but like I know you can't trust like the Germans completely because like we're at war, but even when it comes to like Niekisch's view there, it seems like he's kind of misunderstanding the idea of what collectivism was being used for in the first place, which, as far as I'm aware, it was pretty much common sense that the point of collectivization, if it was done in Germany, even among communists at the time, was to fully industrialize and modernize the country, even though it technically already was.
Yeah. He's saying that like the collective will can harness technology to the will of the people, which maybe Russia wasn't a good example, but I would say I kind of agree with the sentiment. Like,
Yeah, it can be harmonized for the benefit of the people, but he thinks that was Russia. But like Russia wasn't using it for the benefit of the people, really. It was using it for the benefit of the state, which in the case of Russia wasn't the people, because if you look at what the state was doing to the people, it's not the people. I think you can make the case in Italy or Germany it was being used for the people because it was benefiting the people, but that would turn into a circle jerk argument if I talked to anybody who's like a Russia fanboy.
I would say that he is kind of right when it comes to like saying that like Russia has done better at preserving its own identity than the West has.
Yeah, it has done a better job at preserving. Most of the Eastern Bloc has, but at the same time, if we look at the process at which they industrialized to and still preserve that identity, I wouldn't say it's favorable.
Yeah, the life of individuals wasn't worth anything in the Soviet Union. Whereas like in the philosophy of fascism by Mario Palmieri, there is like room for individual liberty within like the fascist structure. It's not like an overbearing like Big Brother entity.
I think the Big Brother concept, the way they're viewing like man, like say like in the Soviet Union with like life, it's not that much different than how like they did like in China when they built the Great Wall. Like a lot of people died. Like what they do with them? They just threw them underneath the wall as they built the wall. That's not valuing life. It's just you consider them just a utility.
Yeah. I think it's like a misanthropic worldview, personally. But
that's what you would have if you take the application of materialism just to politics completely. That's what the people who go morality is a spook, bro, but like everything's a moral decision. If you think everything like morality is a spook and everything isn't the moral decision, you're basically just a sociopath.
Yeah,
Well, I was just gonna say really quick. I think Sergio Panunzio said it best when he said the Soviet state is not a dictatorship of the proletariat; it's a dictatorship over the proletariat.
Yeah.
Didn't Trotsky have similar sentiments? Or
Yeah,
had
he
a
did.
thing?
Yeah, he did, because like what's happening in the Soviet Union, like if you look at the process of like state capitalism or state socialism, state capitalism is the nationalization of the proletariat via the state. So the state is ruling over the proletariat. Well, state capitalism is when you have the bourgeois class, but because of nationalization, they're the one being ruled over. That's like the main distinction between the two. But you still have like market activities, wage labor, commodity production, value form, et cetera, et cetera. But the way the Soviets did it, it was less effective because they're just ruling over the proletariat. They don't have proper administrators, and they're willing to basically kill off most of their population or a large sum of the population to try and compete with the West, which they basically failed because as soon as the market, like the economy was opened up because of the bad investments in the consumer side of the economy, it completely collapsed.
Yeah, but so many tankies will try to argue that.
Wrong.
That's because tankies are brain dead.
Yeah, they do make a lot of retarded arguments because they'll try to go to Grover Furr or some other biased author like Michael Parenti, and they'll try to say, well, Stalin was a wonderful man who did the best for his people, and nothing wrong happened. Mao was a great genius and an awesome intellect of a leader.
That's probably the reason why the only academics that are received well, like the only academics that are received well or call themselves socialists are like anti-Marxist socialists like Chomsky. And the ones that are openly like saying they like Marx, like Zizek, basically have a bastardized view of him with Hegel. And then you have brain dead people like Richard Wolff that are basically largely considered irrelevant outside of like armchair socialist circles.
Right. But it's funny because oh gosh, what was I going to say before I lost my train of thought? But it's just funny because, like with Chomsky, the tanky sphere will say, "Oh, but Chomsky, CIA," and it's like the more I look into fascism, fascism actually does give more individual freedom than what the Soviet Union or China offered. That's for damn sure.
New Ruins has a great video that covers Mario Palmieri's section of the philosophy of fascism on like the fascist conception of liberty. I'd highly recommend that video.
I plan to like Rudolf Young, the National Socialist theorist, also has a writing on that called "The Conception of Individualism and National Socialism." I plan to do a video on that soon too.
I look forward to watching it.
I think I might have linked it to you before. It's on Arplan though. If people are interested, you can find it on Arplan.
Okay. Yeah, does anyone have any final thoughts on the essay overall? I thought it was a good read. I disagree with it in parts. I'm definitely more pro-technology than Ernst Niekisch is. I take the futurist standpoint. I don't know. I like progress, and I think peoples and cultures that can't adapt to technological change are weak cultures. And you know, culture isn't something that's like stuck in time. You know, it should be virile and robust and be able to adapt to changes. Otherwise, it's obsolete. And you know, kind of said this at the start of the show. You know, they're subject to the dustbin of history. It's like my thoughts on technology and technological progress. A strong state should implement it in a way that actually gives a shit about its people, though. As Zol mentioned, the Soviet Union didn't necessarily do that. They saw people as economic units and nothing more, kind of the way capitalism does. Fascism is the only ideology that actually values human life, in my opinion. But it's like my 2 cents. Anyone else?
Yep.
Yeah, even trad fags value human life more because at least they think that like humans have like a moral intrinsic value just by existing as a person because of creation. For them, it's not really about that. The futurists, it's about like individualism as passion, which is why it has value. You have to live it to its fullest. But
Yeah.
for them, it's all about economy, production, stuff like that, socialism. It's really not that much different than the libtard when he says, "But my my property rights."
You know the saying that Patel said about Strausser, if he read Marx, he would actually be a Marxist.
Yeah, it's actually.
I feel like that's his, or
the quote's actually, if Strasser actually read Marx, his criticisms would disappear.
I feel like that would be the same with Niekisch, just with fascism.
Well, the thing is with like Otto wasn't like, he wasn't a Marxist, but I wouldn't say that he's like fascist philosophical. He was more of a say distributist, so like literally a political Catholic, which is why I think he's an idiot. But distributists would disagree with Niekisch because humans have intrinsic value just by existing, because the moralistic claim.
Okay. So if no one has anything to add, we might wrap it up here. We've been going for a little over an hour, so
All right.
I think we got a good podcast. I definitely learned a lot. I hadn't read Niekisch before, so some food for thought, trying something a little different on the Futurism Forever podcast. Yeah, I'll wrap.
A final question for everyone: what would y'all rate this article? Like 1 out of 10.
1 out of 10, I'd give it a solid 8. I enjoyed reading it. I disagreed with a lot of it, but it was worth reading. I do like to consider other perspectives too, and I try and be open-minded. I take the futurist stance on technology more.
I'd give it a 9. I kind of disagree with the anti-Christian sentiment at the end, and also some of the things that Zolt said I agree with about the Soviet Union.
Yeah, same. I'd probably hover between a 7 or an 8 for me. It's pretty well written, but then I don't really agree with some of his conclusions.
Yeah, I'd second that sentiment. Anyway, till next time, take it easy, guys. Be speedy. Yeah, salute.